Hello, Bob Van Rossum with MarketPro. Just completed a CMO executive search and really strong client, about a $250 million software business, higher level marketing executive than they've ever had before, right? So to get from 250 million to 2 billion is a different individual than you needed to get you from 50 to 250. And so they've leveled up significantly their chief marketing officer. And interesting in the process, right? The process went really well. And the salary negotiation part of what we do is so important. And 95% of the time, that's something that we handle. I handle for the client. And we'll make the verbal offer. We'll have any negotiation handled through us. And then at the end, we just have the client send a written offer letter to the candidate, and we'll let the CEO or the hiring manager, could be someone else within the organization, reach out and welcome them to the team, and we'll set up some onboarding time between when the offer letter is signed and their first day in the office, right? So that's kind of our standard process, and that's done that way for a couple of reasons, which we'll get into. But ultimately, in this case, the CEO wanted to extend the offer themselves. I explained to them why that's probably not in their best interest, and they still decided to do it that way anyway. So why don't we do it that way? Why is that not the best path? And then what ultimately happened in this situation, right? So first, the reason we don't do it that way is just simply experience, right? I've now placed 300 chief marketing officers, over 300 other marketing executives that are not the CMO. So it could be the head of brand, head of product, head of digital, head of performance marketing, head of communications. And so we've now got over 600 salary negotiations that I've conducted, which is more than most people. And that experience is really valuable as we're trying to make a fit between the candidate and the client. And there's a big difference there, right? The candidate, this is personal. This is my livelihood. This is how I'm putting food on the table for my children. And in some sense, right, and it varies by candidate, there's always a little bit of, hey, this is how my worth is, and this is how I'm valued as a person based on how much money I'm making, right? And some people are more that way than others, but there's never zero, right? What you've accomplished in life, and when you've gotten to the C-suite, it's important to you to be compensated fairly for your skills, background, and experience. At the end of the day, that's what we want. We want the candidate to be compensated fairly for their skills, background, and experience. And we want the client to get a great return on their investment that they're making in the candidate. And then from the client perspective, it's just business, right? So it's not personal at all. We're here having a business transaction. And that's where the disconnect can happen. So in this case, it was made tricky based on the fact that the candidate was slightly above the top of their salary range. And the client was willing to extend to that range, but really was uncomfortable with going much higher. And so there's two things I recommended. The first thing I recommended was, I understand you're at the top of your range, but psychologically, we want the candidate to get a step forward, even if that step forward is very small, right? So even if it's, $5,000, $10,000 more than they're making now, it shows that you want to move them forward. And they're taking a step forward as they make a move. And in this case, because the opportunity was so great, because the candidate believed in the growth prospects of the organization, and the fact that the long-term incentive might be really a great opportunity as well and worth something down the road, and because she was excited about the people she gets to work with and the culture and everything about the organization, that was really all she was looking for. She wasn't looking for the type of raise we would typically see to switch roles, right? And so the client wanted to come in at her current salary level, so just match that. And the client wanted to make the offer themselves. So there's a way to do that, right? There's a way to present that is different than the way really any CEO is going to do it, and any executive that hasn't had a conversation up until this point in time with the candidate about their compensation. And so we've shared all that information with our client, but the person who's been having conversations with them about compensation is our team, and most likely myself. So I've had 4 or 5 conversations with this candidate around compensation, what their goals are, how this opportunity fits into what their goals are for their career, Where do they want to be in 5 years, 10 years? How does this set them up to get there, right? All of those things are important. And, ultimately what we want is for someone to be a happy long-term employee within this role who is not at a risk of job hopping and not at a risk of doing anything other than taking this organization to a completely different level from a marketing perspective. So the CEO reaches out and makes the offer and says, hey, we're really excited about you joining our team, and we'd like to make you the offer to be the chief marketing officer. And here's the salary, here's the bonus, here's the long-term incentive. And the salary was right where they were today. It wasn't a step forward or a step back. And the candidate understandably was a little disappointed in that. And so then they went back and asked for the exact amount of money that was where I recommended the offer come in the first place. And ultimately, the client went ahead and took care of that, and offer letter got signed, and they are starting here in the very near future, right? But what we're left with is a situation where the CEO needs to go back and, he's obviously got the power to do it, but go ahead and adjust the offer. And the candidate is not feeling as excited as she could because the offer didn't come in where she wanted it to initially, right? And, that's the biggest thing we want to mitigate, right? Is any feelings that are negative around the negotiation process. And that's the main reason you let your executive search partner make the offer, and you as the CEO or the CMO or another executive level hiring manager within an organization, don't try to do it yourself. Because if there is any back and forth, if there are any difficult conversations, I'd rather they be mad at me or disappointed in me than in the client, right? And as I said before, about 95% of the time, I make the offer. And about 5% of the time, the client just says, no, it's really important, I want to do it. And at the end of the day, it's the client's decision. So we can't say, you have to let me do it. They're the ones paying for our services, and they're the ones hiring the candidate. So if they really want to do it, we're going to let them do it. But not only does it risk having some animosity between the new hire and the CEO in this case, but we got the deal done. But we've had it happen in the past where it's a very simple process for us to go out and make the offer, but someone on a client did it, and it was done poorly enough that it blew up the deal completely, unnecessarily, right? And so the best thing is you've hired a professional executive search firm. You've hired, in our case, the top marketing executive search firm on the planet to bring you a new chief marketing officer. Let us go ahead and manage the salary negotiation for you as one more thing that you don't have to worry about. And then you as the CEO can go ahead and just call the candidate and say, hey, we're really excited about you. Welcome to the team. Because even if they had not listened to my recommendation on what the offer should be, and I went to the candidate with the same offer they had, right? And I would have presented it differently, meaning I would have presented it in a way where the candidate knew how excited the client was for them and how much of a stretch this was for them from a compensation perspective. It wouldn't have changed the outcome, meaning the candidate still would have come back and asked for a little bit more. The client still would have given it to them, but they would have been able to start their first day feeling a little bit better about the opportunity and the company, and that little misstep was unnecessary.